If I have a bad thing in front of me and a good thing in front of me, I'm going to look at the bad thing. I'm going to fixate on the bad thing, really focusing on opening that perspective up to see the good thing and the bad thing. And this can be difficult because, there's so many things to get our attention online and on social media that is negative. So it takes conscious effort for us to override this negativity bias so that we can see the whole picture and we don't block out the positive and the great things in life.
You're watching Developing Potential with Diana Kulian.
Welcome back, friends. Today we're talking about 7 ways that your mind plays tricks on you. Now, have you ever wondered to yourself, how accurate is my thinking? Most of us don't. Most of us just assume that our thinking is correct and we move forward in life with the information that we have and our interpretation of that information. Now, what I'm going to share with you today is something called cognitive biases. Now, cognitive biases are essentially mental shortcuts that your brain uses to help you figure things out faster. If you think about all of the information in the world around you and all of the decisions that you have to make and things that you have to see and hear and smell, it's overwhelming. There's so much happening. And so your brain feels like it's doing you a favor when your mind gives you these shortcuts, these cognitive biases to help you arrive at conclusions faster, categorize people, take in data, make decisions, and move on. It's part of being human is to have cognitive biases. Now, today I'm going to share 7 of them with you. And these are 7 of the ones that I feel like are most problematic, that can really lead to us making poor life choices that put us in a place that we don't want to be. That being said, there are hundreds of cognitive biases that have been identified. And if you want to go down a rabbit hole, go online, Google cognitive biases, and there's a lot of really cool images like graphic arts, and there's tons and tons of articles, and you can really learn a lot about the ways that our minds can kind of play tricks on us. And sometimes it's not that harmful, but other times it really is. So let's really talk about cognitive biases and what they are. My favorite way to classify them is really mental shortcuts, because I think that's a really understandable way to put it. We all understand a shortcut. We need shortcuts really to utilize our time and our attention and our energy. And so these cognitive biases are that. But shortcuts can quickly become blind spots. Now, what's a blind spot? It's so easy to see a blind spot in someone else's life, right? And you've had this experience where there's somebody and you're like, why can't you see what I see? Or why don't you, understand this topic the way I do? And it just feels like there's a block for them. And so really, utilizing cognitive biases can lead us to having these big blind spots in our life where we're closing ourselves off to information that we need. In a shortcut, you're cutting things out. You're reducing the amount of information that you're taking in, but it becomes a blind spot when that stuff that you cut out is actually really important. Cognitive biases are not based in fact. These are our perceptions. So it's like we're putting our own spin on it, or it's almost like we're constructing our own reality by picking and choosing what pieces we're going to pay attention to, and then that's our reality. And everything else is kind of over here. And that's where the blind spots come in, and that's where you're making decisions on a select amount of data. You're leaving all this other data out. Right? If you think you see the whole picture, but you don't, your decision is not necessarily going to be the best decision for you or take you to the best place in life. And what we know about our thoughts is that it's connected to our feelings, and our feelings are connected to our behavior. So you can see how cognitive biases can really get us off track when we have faulty thinking that then kind of ripple effects into negative emotions and then, behaviors that don't benefit us. So this is really important to start thinking about and identifying where you have cognitive biases in your life. Now, something to know about cognitive biases is that they're automatic and they happen under the radar. So you're never going to tell yourself, I need a shortcut right now. I'm going to use a cognitive bias. It just happens, right? It's happening beneath the surface. And so that's why we need to take the time to learn about these and really get feedback from others to see, where are some of my blind spots? And as we go through these 7 cognitive biases today, really taking the time to be self-reflective and honest with yourself and really thinking, it can be humbling. And when I first learned about cognitive biases and I would read them, your first reaction is kind of like, oh, I don't do this. But then when you sit with it for a minute, it's like, oh yeah, I do that. I can think of times and places where I do that. And so bringing that awareness to your thinking mind to really help you avoid them, because we want to avoid having these cognitive biases and having them steer us in the wrong direction. Or like the title says, having our mind play tricks on us. So cognitive biases happen to everyone. There is not a human brain on the planet where cognitive biases don't happen, which essentially means every single brain is going to look for shortcuts. And oftentimes that's okay. That helps us live and be successful and get through life. But when these cognitive biases really get in the way of us seeing the whole picture and making good decisions, that's where things get off track. So I'm going to go through the 7 ways that your mind plays tricks on you. The first one is called the confirmation bias. So the confirmation bias is when we favor information that supports our beliefs. And if you're honest with yourself, you can probably really see how this comes to play in your life. So you're not seeking objective facts. You're really only looking for facts that support your opinion, right? And so I think of this with, when we have vices. And I think of back when I was a wine drinker and how it's so easy to look for the data and the facts that support your habits, even though part of your brain knows this isn't a really healthy habit. But then you can look up an article that tells you all about all the antioxidants in wine. Or, back in my teens when I would go to tanning beds, which ended up with, I've had skin cancer in my life. And I attribute a lot of that to those decisions that I made where I didn't look at the facts about how tanning beds can cause skin cancer. I heard it and then I kind of pushed it away. And I only paid attention to the facts that I liked about that decision. And so that's a confirmation bias. We pay attention to information that supports what we want to be true, what we want to be good for us. This is a really important one to look at and to realize, hey, I need to take in all of the facts and really make a sound, logical decision rather than just doing what I want to do because I want to do it. All right, the second cognitive bias that we're going to talk about is the fundamental attribution error. Now, this sounds complicated, but it's really simple. We judge others on their fundamental character, but then we judge ourselves on the situation. So here's a perfect example. When you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm always like, that jerk. Like, in my mind, that is a rotten person and they have just wronged me. Now, I don't think when I do it, because I've cut people off before. I've been late to the airport. I've been in a hurry. I've cut people off. But to me, I don't sit there and think I'm a big jerk. I think I'm late or I am dealing with an emergency here, an emergency for my life, what I consider an emergency. But to the person that I cut off, I'm a jerk. It's my character. And so this is that fundamental attribution error where we judge others on character, but then we judge ourselves on the situation. So it's important to notice this. The third cognitive bias is the self-serving bias. And this is kind of similar to the fundamental attribution error in that we look at our failures as being situational, but then our success as being our responsibility. So a great example of this one would be in school. Let's say you study really hard for a test and you get an A. And so to you, you're going to attribute that to you. I studied, I understand the information, I did great. Now, if you take another test and let's say you don't do so well, we're going to attribute that failure to the situation. It was the teacher's fault. The teacher made it too hard. There wasn't a study guide for this one. I didn't sleep well last night. We blame the situation, but then when we have an accomplishment, we claim the achievement. Okay, the fourth cognitive bias is the false consensus. Now, with the false consensus, we believe that more people agree with us than really do. And it's easy to just think like you hear something from a couple of people or a couple of people agree with you, what you're saying, and all of a sudden it's like, everybody thinks this, everybody agrees with me. And this is something that, this cognitive bias is just this simple, I don't even know how this is a mental shortcut, but this is almost like just making us feel better. And I had an example of this. We have a software, and I remember we got I was told all of the users are freaking out because of X, Y, and Z. And so immediately I was like, okay, everybody, all of the users are freaking out. We've got to figure this out, like emergency. And then I thought to ask, like, wait, how many users have complained? And the answer was 2. And at the time, I think we had about 5,000 users. So I in that moment, I was like, whoa, I can see how it felt like everybody was freaking out if, this person's morning was spent dealing with these 2 really upset customers, these upset users of the software. And then the false consensus comes into play, and this person is like, everybody feels this way about the software. But then when we get all the facts, it's like, no, okay, 2 people out of 5,000 felt this way. The fifth cognitive bias it's twofold. It's the halo effect or the horn effect. And so what this is when we get an impression of somebody based on a single characteristic or a single experience with them. And if it's positive, then we kind of have this halo over them, and we just assume that everything about them is positive. And if that, experience or part of them was negative for us, then we assume that everything about them is negative. And this is one, when you talk about it, it sounds silly, because who actually thinks that any human is all good or all bad? But it's really easy to fall into this mental shortcut with people. And if you think about it, it's almost like just putting them in a category, right? Like if I meet you and I like your shirt and we have a good conversation, it's like, all right, halo. Now, every time that I see you, if it was a good enough first impression, I'm just like, yeah, everything is good about this person. And if I get any information or anything happens between us that could be negative, I'm going to assume the best about you because I've got this halo. And then the same could be with, having the horn effect where, the first time you meet somebody, they're rude to you. And I mean, we've all had this experience, probably more than the halo effect, where it's like, gosh, this person is rude. And now we avoid, being around them. We avoid interaction with them. If somebody that we know is friends with them, we're like, oh, well, what do you see in that person? Why are you hanging out with them? Right? It's the horn effect, which isn't taking in all of the information, right? And so that you can see how this halo effect and this horn effect can really negatively impact our relationships. All right, the sixth cognitive bias is the spotlight effect. Now, I feel like the spotlight effect is even more intense now in this day and age of social media. But the spotlight effect is this phenomenon of overestimating how much people are paying attention to our behavior and our appearance. And this is such a relatable thing, to think that everyone's looking at you. And I think especially when there's something that we are embarrassed of, like let's say you're giving a speech and you stumble on a word, to think like, everybody's judging me, right? Everybody's paying attention to this. And I was reading about a study this morning where they were testing this spotlight effect. And the way they tested it was they gave half of the participants in the study like a ridiculous t-shirt, just something just super goofy and weird, like something embarrassing that none of them wanted to wear. And then they gave the other half of the group like a really cool shirt. And it had like some celebrities on it or something that was just super like in at the time. And so they put these people all out in public, and then they brought them back and they asked them like, hey, what percentage of the people that you walked past do you think noticed your shirt? And the people with like the ugly, weird shirt said like, I think 50% of the people noticed. And in reality, because this is a study, so they're taking in all the data, it was like less than 20% of the people that walked past them even noticed what their shirt looked like. And this is just an example of how, it's so easy to think that we're the center of the universe, because really we are the center of our own universe. But then when this cognitive bias really gets moving in us, it can lead us to have higher anxiety. It can lead us to be more self-conscious about ourselves. It can lead us to beat ourselves up for mistakes that we make or perceived flaws. And this is like, I think, a heartbreaking part of social media is how especially young girls will really try to meet a standard of physical beauty that's, first of all, it's not real, but then will beat themselves up and find these, flaws that no one else could see. And I think this spotlight effect really kind of feeds into that, this idea that everybody's looking at me, and really everybody's looking at me in a critical way. And this is a cognitive bias. This isn't the fact, and the fact is we are not that important in other people's lives for them to be sitting there, putting us under a microscope. They're just not, right? We're doing that to ourselves. So it's important that we realize that the spotlight effect, it's a cognitive bias. It's not based in reality. Okay, the seventh cognitive bias is the negativity bias. And this one is so hard to avoid, right? This takes training, but it's the tendency of the brain to place more emphasis on negative events than positive ones. And, it comes from evolution. It makes sense that we need to pay attention to negative and scary and bad things so that we can keep ourselves safe. But we can get into this, almost like the hypnotic rhythm we learned about with Napoleon Hill talks about how anything that we do repetitively is going to really stick with us and it's going to become automatic. And so when we allow our brain and our thoughts to go to the negative, to look, if you're getting a performance report and you had 9 great things about you, but there was one piece of constructive criticism, the negativity bias has you fixate on that one negative thing and ignore, the 9 other great things that were said about you, right? And you can see how this can really, over time, damage our self-esteem and just put us into a negative headspace. And so really paying attention to our brain's shortcut of, if I have a bad thing in front of me and a good thing in front of me, I'm going to look at the bad thing. I'm going to fixate on the bad thing, really focusing on opening that perspective up to see the good thing and the bad thing, right? And not getting into that trap of just looking for the negative. And this can be difficult because, today the news is negative. Like there's so many things to get our attention online and on social media that is negative. So it takes conscious effort for us to override this negativity bias so that we can see the whole picture and we don't block out the positive and the great things in life by just looking at the negative. All right, friends, that was a lot. That was 7 cognitive biases that might make you feel like your mind is playing tricks on you. And like I said earlier, there are hundreds of these. If you want to dig into it online, you can learn about more cognitive biases. It's super interesting. So your extra credit for the week is to spend time thinking about your thoughts. And here's a fancy word for you. Thinking about your thoughts is called metacognition. So I want you to spend some time doing some metacognition this week, analyzing your thoughts and really looking out for these cognitive biases. And I want to leave you with one more thing. There's another bias that's called the blind spot bias, where as I've taught you these 7 cognitive biases, you might be thinking to yourself, I don't have any biases. Well, that is actually a bias where we feel that we don't have blind spots. We take in all the information, but other people have the blind spots. So beware of that as you do your metacognition this week. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this content and got something out of it. Please like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. I'll be back next week with more content.
Thanks for watching Developing Potential with Diana Coulian.